guys, it's Nikki here. I'm here today to do my VBC Book of the Month review, which is my more in-depth book review. And this month I read Bloodline by Kate Cary. This was picked at random off my shelf by my husband. I'm getting him to pick books I haven't read off my shelf to just get through them, and then I can either keep them or get rid of them as I so choose. All I knew about this book was kind of what I'd read in my Try a Chapter vlog back in June and what the synopsis said. So you're following a couple of characters through journal entries, and they're on a mission to end Dracula's bloodline as it was continued through this person, and now they're dealing with that family. This is all happening during World War I, which makes me just kind of shake my head a little bit at certain points, which I'll get into a little bit later. As I mentioned, the story is told through diary entries, and when I saw that, I was really excited. I typically do kind of enjoy those like diary letter, like logs style or interview style, like when it feels a little bit more episodic, I guess. And I typically really enjoy it done that way. And although I enjoyed it here, I had some other issues. And just another thing to add, although I have not read Bram Stoker's initial work that this is based off of, I have been told that it is very similar to the original Dracula story, to the point where some people thought it was just like a rewrite of it, I guess, based on some of the reviews. I personally, like I said, have never read it, so I don't know for sure, but it's just something to keep in mind if you're wanting to read this. And now I'm going to go on to kind of the progression and pacing a little bit. The pacing itself was not awesome. I felt like everything was a little bit too quick, and there were certain places where I especially wished we had had a little bit more elaboration so things would make a little bit more sense, because I ended up just getting confused and frustrated with a lot of what was going on. And the progression itself is pretty choppy, and I think that has a great deal to do with how quickly the book was moving forward. Just the pacing, like I said, was so quick that I think it actually really ended up affecting the progression of the story. Spend a lot of time on John, who's one of the main characters' recovery after he comes back with a fever and like PTSD, and they don't know how to deal with it. So he's in a sanatorium/hospital, and they really dwell on how long his recovery takes. And then there's things at the back end that happened really, really quickly that I think really would have benefited from a little bit more time and maybe a little bit less time on John's recovery. I think my big complaint, just going back to the pacing here, my big complaint with that is that as you increase how fast the story moves forward, I usually find that it increases the tension in situations a lot more by keeping things coming, keeping you engaged, by pushing you forward because things are happening. And I didn't get that same sense here with the pacing. It was quick, but I felt like the story was just like dripping, like falling between the cracks, dripping through my fingers faster than I could comprehend what was going on. So it ended up feeling like, I think it ended up really being detrimental to the book as a whole. And with that, I'm going to move on to the characters, and oh boy, did I not enjoy these characters. They all felt very flat. I didn't really enjoy them in any capacity. They were too naive or too frustrating, or their story arc went just like completely off the rails, which is my big complaint for John. Despite what this book was about, nobody grabbed me as sympathetic or relatable in any way, including the vampire family. So that was kind of upsetting. Because I'd read the first chapter of this book, I had actually had really high hopes. The first like 50 pages were really intriguing, and I hoped that I would really enjoy it in the end, but every 50 pages, I'd get less and less convinced that I was going to enjoy the book. And I think it was like by page 190, I was just like, yeah, I'm done. This is not going to end the way I want or even hoped for. And the characters were just getting more and more confusing for me. So, they're not confusing. The characters were getting more and more irritating for me, especially in regards to their stories. So I was not in a good mood by the time I finished. And now I'm going to move on to my likes and dislikes. As you can tell, my likes are somewhat few and far between here. Although I didn't care for the characters and most of what they did, I did enjoy that Mary was somewhat of a grounding force. It was nice to have a little bit of, well, if we keep working at it, like, we'll figure something out. Because the rest of the story just felt so out of control. Like, having even just a little bit of that was kind of nice. And then the other thing I liked was the representation of the World War I battlefront. I'm not an enormous World War I history buff, but the little bit that I know about it, I think they did a really good job representing the strife and concern at the beginning, like on the front lines, and how a captain like Quincy Harker would have been beloved and hated, and why he would have had that much power to begin with, and kind of the impact of the environment in general just on the soldiers, just like with No Man's Land and the trenches. And that was probably my favorite part of the book. And it involved none of the characters or main story. Now I'll move on to my dislikes. I mean, there was a lot here. I really struggled with it. I didn't like how the characters were like naive and frustrating to the point, or naive to the point of being frustrating. The family tree that they kept coming up with felt convoluted. Every time I thought I figured out like who was whose parent, something else would come up and I'd get confused. And I don't know if it was just me not reading it properly, because to be quite frank, by the very end I was skimming at best because I was not enjoying myself. But regardless, by the time I got to the end, I still was kind of confused as to who was related to Dracula and why. And as I mentioned kind of in the progression, with how choppy, with being that it was choppy, I actually really did not enjoy the story progression. It was inconsistent and sometimes confusing. Like, they're traveling to continental Europe during World War I, and my understanding is that should not have been able to happen, based on what I know. But like, it just was very confusing. Like, they're talking about crossing places that I thought would have been like German occupied territory, but they were just like, yeah, no, we can go there. People will take us, and then we'll just cross into this other area. And it's just, of all the things that I felt like I could reasonably suspend my disbelief for, because this is a story about vampires, that felt like a little bit too much for some reason. And I don't adequately have the words to explain why it irritated me so much. Who knows, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they could freely travel like that. But it rubbed me the wrong way that of all the things that were there, that was something that happened. Like, I don't know if you guys can tell, but I really did not enjoy this book very much. And with that, I'm going to stop there, because if I keep going, I could rant all day about the things I didn't particularly enjoy. So I'll move into the wrap up. For me, this was actually a 2 out of 5 stars. It's not the absolute worst book I've read, but I really struggled with it. And I really wanted to like this book. Like I said, that first 50 pages I did actually enjoy, but every time I got another 50 pages through the story, it just kept devolving into something that I had not signed up for. And maybe that's on me for misunderstanding the synopsis, or the synopsis just not being as descriptive of the story as maybe it should have been. Which isn't on the author either. It is what it is. And it's just, the story, I felt like it was skipping. Like, things would happen that I would think that required different choices, different things going on. And it just ended up being uninteresting because I never felt like I was getting enough information. and just by the end, I wasn't engaged or empathetic with the story or the characters, and I was just ready to put it down by the time I got to that last page. If I hadn't been doing it for this kind of review, I probably wouldn't have finished it. So that is kind of all I have for the review portion. Now I'm going to be moving on to my virtual book club questions that I touch base with every month for these reviews with the books I read. This is the part where, although the rest of the story hasn't been particularly spoiler-free, this part definitely will have lots of spoilers. The first question is, what was your initial reaction? For me, it was actually interest. Because like I said, I like the writing style of having like diary entries or letters, kind of that more episodic feel, where you are required to connect more dots as you go. And I was really interested as to what had happened that was bothering John so much. Which is really unfortunate, because by the end I hated John. He was the absolute goddamn worst. His story arc was unreasonable to me and ended up feeling so ridiculous. It made me feel bad for being so invested in his story at the beginning of the book. 2, what is your favorite chapter or scene? I didn't necessarily have a favorite chapter or scene as related to the characters, but I did really enjoy when we were going through John's journals on the battlefield that we were getting a really good sense of how demoralizing and awful it was to live there and to be a part of the front to begin with. They did a really good job. The author did a really good job with that part of the story. How did the characters change throughout the book? In my opinion, they all changed for the worst, because by the time they got to Transylvania, it was like a soap opera. And people were finding out that their fathers weren't their fathers, and they were actually vampires. Looking at you, John. Question 4 is, how did you like the ending? As you can tell based on my last 2 answers where I've complained about the conclusion of John's story arc, I was not super impressed with it. There were so many times I was just rolling my eyes because of how people were kind of closing their story arcs up while still letting the broader one continue. Question 5 is, would you read more by this author? And I have to say, I truly don't know. I know there's a sequel to this book that I am 100% never picking up. But I'm really torn because I would love to give the author more than one chance. But at the same time, I didn't enjoy this book at all, so I don't know that I would prioritize picking up a book by them. And then my 6th and final question is, what does this book remind you of? And I have to say, it doesn't really remind me of anything. I've never read Dracula's Bram Stoker, so although I'm told it's similar, I don't know that I could necessarily recommend it either. But I don't read a lot of vampire books, especially the more like traditional stuff like this. So I really don't have a recommendation here, unfortunately. But if anybody here is watching this and has liked the book and has read or even disliked the book, but has read other books that are very similar, please leave that down in the comments below. I would be really interested in at least looking them up and checking them out. And for anybody who wants to read more books who happens across this video, I think that, they would probably enjoy it too. This is going to be a really long video because I was trying to stay calm and measured the whole time instead of letting myself get really carried away about how much I didn't enjoy this book. So I talked for way too long. Hopefully it's not horrendous, and I'll see you guys in the next video.